So I'm going to talk about consciousness, which is probably one of the most mysterious phenomena in the universe. And understanding it is one of the most compelling and difficult questions in science and philosophy. But I think it's fair to say that no one really has a clue about what consciousness is. So I think that's partly because people are starting in the wrong place with invalid assumptions about how behavior works. If we take PCT as a starting point, I believe we can arrive at a sort of unique and radical understanding of the nature of consciousness that is sort of sensible, materialistic, and testable. So in essence, the idea is that consciousness is the control of the perception of quality. And the means of that control is learning and reorganization. Also, none of the current approaches, the contemporary approaches of consciousness, can account for the sort of the meaning and value that we have in our lives. But I think this perspective adds a sort of new dimension to our understanding of consciousness that sort of does explain that and sort of explains why we are not zombies or automatons. So what exactly is the problem? What's the sort of issue that we're talking about here? Well, the main question is, why do we have awareness, which is also known as phenomenal or conscious experience? Why are we conscious of the world around us, of our own thoughts and existence? Why are we sort of aware of anything at all? And there's many ways in which we are conscious, and the way we experience things is sort of qualitative rather than quantitative, which we call qualia. For example, we don't experience colors as quantitative wavelengths of light, but as experience which have their own sort of qualitative character to them. And different domains of conscious experience have their own different feels to them. So a view of a sunset feels different to the sound of middle C or the taste of lemon meringue pie. So why, the question is, why do we have any of this at all, given it's just neural activity underneath? So this is what the philosopher David Chalmers called the sort of hard problem of consciousness. And generally in philosophy, it's acknowledged that there's an explanatory gap between sort of subjective mental experience and the materialistic physical world, and no one has really come close to addressing this problem. On the other hand, the easy problems are those that have a more mechanistic explanation, such as how memories are stored or how information is integrated. Now, Chalmers suggested that conscious experience is an epiphenomenon, so it has no causal effect and is not a byproduct of the brain. And he came up with the idea of philosophical zombies. So beings that are identical to you, though have no conscious awareness whatsoever of what they're doing, but would act as if they were conscious. So if a zombie was punched in the face, it would feel no pain, but it would act as if it did. So I think with the help of PCT, although we may not completely banish the hard problem, I think we can show that it is sort of misconceived, and consciousness is not an epiphenomenon, but is a fundamental and causal aspect of our existence and behavior. Here are some of the most prominent current theories of consciousness. IIT, it's about integrating large amounts of information, such as in a visual scene, and says that the visual scene can only be experienced as a whole, requiring sort of integration of the parts. According to GWT, a global workspace contains the contents of consciousness fed by multiple non-conscious systems. Higher order theories say that phenomenal consciousness is associated with higher order mental representations about perceptions from first order sensory regions. Some people think that quantum mechanics is necessary for and can explain consciousness. Others think that consciousness happens when neurons fire in oscillations at a frequency of 40 to 70 hertz, which then activates short-term memory. Panpsychism is quite a sort of different theory in that it proposes that mind or consciousness is a property of matter, of all matter, and therefore it's sort of independent of brains. So this would bizarrely suggests that things like water, rocks, or marshmallows have sort of mental states, even though they've never shown any indication whatsoever of behavior, interaction, or experience. So that seems a bit crazy to me, and perhaps just smacks of desperation because people don't have a clue what consciousness is and have run out of ideas. Though panpsychism seems to be taken seriously by serious philosophers, including David Chalmers. But I think all these ideas suffer from one or more of these problems. Why should processing of data lead to consciousness? Why and how does quantum mechanics or neural oscillations lead to consciousness? Why would there be a threshold to processing or complexity beyond which things become conscious? As it seems clear that not all consciousness is complex. For example, things like hunger, pain, colors, or a caress seem to be sort of simple and unitary conscious experiences. Why does the processing of particular information at one time lead to conscious states, and another time, a later time, result in unconscious states? The current theories aren't able to answer these questions, in my view. And as for panpsychism, well, it just seems so wrong that these questions aren't even relevant to it. So usually in discussions of consciousness, they focus on why we are conscious, but don't talk about what I think is a more interesting question, and that is why we are not conscious. Because there are many ways in which we are not conscious, but still behave and interact with the world. I think most of what we do occurs without consciousness. For example, the iris system in the eye just goes ahead by itself, unconsciously opening and closing to maintain a consistent amount of light falling on the retina, even though there must be associated neural activity underneath in the nervous system. But we're not aware of it going on. There are some things of which we were once aware, but are no longer. So when learning a new task or skill, such as playing guitar, we focus our attention on the minutiae of what is required to pick up the skill. But once we've learned it, we're no longer aware of the details, so it becomes second nature. Our attention and awareness shifts around. What was conscious is not conscious anymore. This can happen if our attention is caught by something in the environment or due to an internal goal changing. Some people sort of lack conscious experience that most of us would regard as normal. Psychopaths, for example, lack conscious awareness when it comes to emotions such as empathy and fear, which of course means that their interaction with people is very different from the rest of us. Though if any of you today are psychopaths, you probably have no idea of what I'm talking about. With the blind sight condition, there's some people appear to be able to perceive but have no conscious perception. So a subject may say that they cannot see an object in their field of view, but when asked are able to identify it or even catch it when it is thrown to them. Then there's the condition congenital analgesia, where people are unable to feel pain. So although they may be able to sort of detect something touching them, they do not feel pain when touching a red hot stove, for example. So, and the results can be devastating with burns, broken bones, and usually sort of early death. So if you can't feel pain, you're in big trouble. So what does PCT have to say about consciousness? Well, in behavioral control of perception, Bill Powers talks about the link between learning and consciousness, in that learning requires consciousness. And consciousness is a way of directing the randomness within the organization. And so driven by error, you focus attention on areas that need improvement, which by definition means are of poor quality. And you consciously adjust things and then sort of perceive the results. So for example, when learning to play the guitar, you focus on finger positioning And you sort of change your positions around to perceive until you perceive the sort of desired sound. And Bill defines consciousness as consisting of perception and awareness, where awareness is the duplicates of perceptual signals. So in terms of conscious experience and awareness, this suffers the same problem as the other theories, and it doesn't really explain why duplicates of perceptual signals should result in awareness. So as I mentioned, within PCT, there's a sort of fundamental connection between error, attention, awareness, and learning, which sort of indicates that the role of consciousness is to improve quality. And although Bill doesn't really talk about phenomenal experience, he does mention sort of intrinsic goals to maintain high quality, such as the need for a degree of harmony or beauty. So I think we can go one step further and sort of say that what we consciously perceive is actually a perception of quality. So whereas unconscious behavior is just the control of quantitative signals, conscious experience of things in the world is not direct awareness of those things, but awareness of the quality they represent. So conscious awareness is like a sort of meta-perception, and qualia are perceptions of quality. So I think we can reframe consciousness as the control of perception of quality. And more specifically, consciousness is the control of the perception of quality in the context of long-term interaction of the organism with its environment. And the means by which that control occurs is through reorganization and learning. So this perspective adds a sort of new dimension to our conception of consciousness. Conscious experience does not comprise merely signals or information or more information or complex information, but is of a completely different dimension, which is of quality with respect to our interaction with the world. So to get a feel of what perception of quality means, and what would be the result if we could not perceive quality, let's consider if we became zombies and lacked awareness in the sense that not being able to perceive quality with respect to the world. Well, one thing, first of all, there would be no more music. So a scratch from a record or a hum from a record player would sound no better or worse than a symphony. Comedy would disappear. No one could tell the difference between a good joke and a bad joke, or between sort of humor and tragedy. So the same with the rest of the arts, they would disappear. No longer would anyone sit and contemplate the beauty of a sunset or appreciate any form of beauty. Football, baseball, cricket, they'd all be gone. So who would care about them? All sports and games would disappear. There'd be no more masturbation. After all, why would anyone do it if it not feel good? And the same with sex. Restaurants would be out. There'd be no discernible difference between a difference in quality between a lobster thermidor, a Big Mac, or a blade of grass. And the same with all these other industries, which are all about providing a quality of experience. So when quality is removed from our conscious experience, there's little, if anything, left. And gone along with quality are its counterparts, sort of value and meaning, which motivates us in everything we do. Without any appreciation of quality, we would not care about doing any of this, and the world as we know it would not function. So a philosophical zombie is a sort of logical and physical impossibility. A zombie could only act to sort of fulfill control based on quantity, like a fly or an automaton. So consciousness has a significant causal role and is not an epiphenomenon. if humans were zombies, there would be sort of nothing to live for, no interactions that would be of any value. There'd be no compassion, no empathy, no mercy. Incidentally, if you haven't read it already, I'd highly recommend Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is all about quality. And I think when read from a PCT perspective, it's about the perception of quality. So how's all this evolved? Well, I think it's difficult to unravel billions of years of evolution, but I had a few thoughts related to the rise of quality. So clearly, if an organism can perceive and control the quality of its interaction with the environment and change its internal structure, it will be able to adapt its behavior during its lifetime rather than be stuck with the capabilities that it has at birth. Now, apparently, early animals in the sea had soft bodies as there were no predators initially. And then hard bodies developed as a protection from the predators that arose. Then later, soft bodies evolved again. So this may have coincided with sort of the rise of nascent consciousness, in that the experience of pain provided a protective barrier as effective as a hard body, yet allowed the flexibility of soft bodies. Now, some conscious perceptions can clearly be viewed as quality, as they're on a sort of negative to positive scale, such as pain, pleasure, fear. But others are not so obvious, such as colors, which at first glance, they don't appear to sort of represent quality. But I think we can look to the art world to try and understand how that might be the case. Kandinsky, one of the pioneers of Western abstract art, he rejected sort of representational art, figurative art, and his goal was to sort of uncover the sort of inner meaning that the basic elements of art, such as color and sensation had for us. So I think perhaps the existence of abstract art does indicate that we do see quality in those basic elements. Dennis Dutton, in his book, The Art Instinct, discusses research that found that in different cultures, there was a sort of a universal appreciation of what was termed a blue landscape. So perhaps as a blue sky is evident to all humans, it represents sort of quality in terms of good weather for harvesting, hunting, or travel. Perhaps it goes back even further to a time when our distant ancestors were emerging from the sea and exploring the land. The blue landscape of the sea may have represented quality in terms of returning to a safe refuge from the dangers of land-based predators. As an example, David Mankin, the British artist, creates these sort of very evocative abstract paintings, and they're predominantly blue, inspired by the Cornish seascapes. And they're very popular sort of internationally. So I think it's intriguing to think that the reason that might be is because not only do they represent sort of, or arouse feelings of quality present in all humans, but also indicative perhaps of a primeval attachment to the sea. So I think this idea of consciousness fits quite well with the concept of flow, also known as being in the zone. It's a sort of mental state, often joyful, of being completely immersed in an activity whereby everything is operating smoothly without having to think about the details. And so while learning to dance, for example, there's a great deal to focus conscious attention on. The placement of the feet, how to hold your partner, where to place the arms, how to position the fingers for a firm lead, how and when to turn your partner, and how to synchronize with both your partner and the timing of the music. And it would really be sort of impractical and onerous if you had to think about all of these things every time you danced. But I think fortunately, after a few years of learning, as I found with salsa dancing, the details become sort of second nature and sort of slip out of consciousness. So once you become accomplished, you get to the point of dancing when you're only concentrating on the moment and the joy of everything working without needing to think about it. So I think flow is the sort of culmination of a successful process of the conscious control of a perception of quality, where advanced skills have been learned for a sort of challenging activity. And consciousness only happens at the higher level, which results in sort of joyful and rewarding feelings of being in control of the task, which is being performed without error. So I think this theory does suggest some ways for testing consciousness that may not have been considered before. One of the things that's central to this view is that conscious awareness is necessary for reorganization that takes place during learning. So it follows that someone who lacks awareness could not learn a new skill. So therefore, it should be possible to take a blind sight zombie and try to teach them to juggle, for example. So if they are only able to unconsciously perceive the balls, they would not be aware of the qualitative consequences of their actions. So reorganization wouldn't take place and they wouldn't be able to learn the skill. Now, in PCT, we already have the TCV, but could we devise the test for the conscious controlled variable, which would sort of isolate variables that must be conscious that sort of represent subjective experience? For example, could we test whether or not an animal controls for alcohol or drug consumption where performance would be adversely affected? So in that sort of situation, the benefits to the animal would only be in terms of the subjective experience of being sort of drunk or stoned. Now, with other animals, it's difficult to say with any certainty if any other animals are conscious, but it's very compelling when viewing examples such as these chimpanzees sort of reuniting. And the study of consciousness in animals is a big area of research, so could that be re-evaluated and enhanced with this theory of the control of perception of quality in mind? Within ourselves, there are many sort of internal subsystems which operate successfully without associated awareness, such as the iris system. Could it be possible to introduce restrictions or disturbances in those systems to sort of evoke persistent system error, which would then result in conscious awareness not previously experienced? Another big area of research is trying to find neural correlates of consciousness, without much success, I think. But I suggest that the reason the link between neural activity and phenomenal experience has not been established, because no one's really been looking for activity and structures that represent the perception and control of quality. So this would be a new way at looking at the neuroscience of consciousness. So to summarize all that then, consciousness is the control of the perception of quality, where awareness is a perception of quality. And conscious attention is the direction of the focus of learning to areas of error in quality. And attention on the outcomes of action is necessary for learning to take place. And the means by which the perception of quality is controlled and the error reduced is by learning and reorganization. So consciousness is embodied. It's an embodied phenomena and not an epiphenomenon, but is derived from materialistic structures, in other words, brains. And it has a causal role not to provide high-level reasoning or logical thinking, but to improve the quality of interaction with the environment. And once successful learning has taken place and the quality is high, the conscious control is no longer necessary. And I think this perception of quality idea explains why things have meaning and value for us. So conscious experiences have evolved such that the way they feel motivates us in ways that correspond to a positive outcome of our interaction with the world. So, for example, this explains why things that are bad for us feel bad. So rotten meat smells bad because our conscious experience of rotten meat has developed that way in terms of its effect on our well-being. So I think this theory has sort of profound implications for artificial intelligence systems, because if, as this theory suggests, most of our complex behavior and interaction with the world requires the control of the perception of quality, then any AI system which lacks that ability would never be able to behave with anything other than severe limitations. An autonomous vehicle, for example, has no concept of the meaning or value of what it's doing. It would not care whether or not it plows into a crowd of people. So without the perception of quality, autonomous vehicles and other AI systems would be unable to progress beyond the sort of rudimentary capabilities of the sort of mindless and uncaring automatons that they are currently.
About 4 minutes.
Okay, I'm just finishing off now. So finally, there's still an enormous amount to figure out with this theory. This is just a starting point for thinking about consciousness in a different way. But rather than there being a hard problem, there's a big challenge, and that is to explain why neural substrates and processes that encapsulate perception of quality are synonymous with conscious experience. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Rupert. Are there any questions? Few ones. Michael's first, and then Gary. And then we'll have to see if there's time.
Hi, Rupert. Brilliant talk. Really awesome. I imagine Phaedrus would be proud. I had a question regarding, do you think, let's have a case where you have two different people. Would you suggest, based on your model, that people were actually able to differ in the amount that they perceive quality, or how do we measure? Because I'm getting there's an implication from your talk that you could almost have a higher sense of consciousness if you were able to perceive quality more, or is that kind of not where you're going with this? I see this, that if we were to look at it in that way, we'll be able to be somewhat empirical about consciousness.
Well, I'm not sure if this answers the question, but I think quality is subjective. So something that is good quality for one person is not good quality for another person. I know, for example, in terms of quality, the Taliban think that quality to them is suppressing the rights of women, which is obviously bad quality for other people. So quality is subjective. So I'm not sure that you can sort of measure it on a sort of empirical way in that sort of sense. Does that sort of get to your question to some point?
It does. I guess then you're saying that the way in which